Hey, Gen X, we're talking about where we were allowed to be in our houses and where we weren't allowed to be in the houses, and we're going to do it with the help of the Bradys. Stick around. Hi, welcome to the Gen X Reference Desk. Today we're talking about a lot of the homes that many of us grew up in the late 60s, 70s, and 80s. We're talking about suburban America. Suburban America in the mid-20th century is a lot of GIs that are out of the war, they're wanting to set up a home, and they're looking for houses, and so a lot of urban flight going on. A lot of white families are leaving urban areas and they're headed out to the suburbs. So when we talk about this, know that this is a lot of white America. Minorities did not have the same advantages that the white Americans did because it was harder to acquire a loan, to buy a house, move into these subdivisions if you did not look a certain way. If you weren't living in suburban America, we were watching it on TV. So let's talk about it. And a lot of these mid-century homes that we were living in the 20th century, I know, just it is what it is. We got to accept it. Move on. Let's keep moving on. A lot of these homes that we were all living in is that they were designed specifically for a separation between the adults and the kids, with formal living space and an informal living space. Formal space is when you come into the house and that's where you greet your guests. That's where, you make sure that, the vacuum cleaner lines are still in place, clean and tidy, where you can receive company. Davy Jones comes over to give you his latest album and to ask you to prom, which isn't creepy at all because he's not over 21 asking out somebody in high school, because that would be creepy, Davy Jones. But if Davy Jones is coming over, and you would entertain Davy Jones in the living room, because the layout of these houses was designed for kids to be in a separate space, a more informal space. Den, the basement, the rompus room, the game room, the family room, all of these names all kind of signify like the spare space where kids could hang out. They can be loud and do whatever and make a mess, but it doesn't spill over into the formal living area. When we see the Bradys, the kids are a lot of times, if it's informal, they're in the den. They're doing the homework, they're watching TV, they're on the phone. Maybe, but if they're doing something formal as a family, maybe they're watching TV as a family, they do that in the living room. Let's take a look at the Bradys. So when they're in the living room, Carol and Mike are in the living room. A lot of the times they're drinking coffee, they're talking about their day, while the kids are in the den. That's where the kids are meant to stay. The layout of these houses was designed so that we were hanging out in these places. We were going into the living room. Why? Because you weren't supposed to be in the living room. And the one thing you don't do in the living room, you don't play in the living room. What happens if you play in the living room? Exactly what Mom told you was going to happen. Something's going to break. And what happens? You break Mom's vase. Technically, they were upstairs and they were being a little rowdy, then it came downstairs, and maybe that was a bad plan. But you get the point. Moving on. Maybe they're playing a game of building a house of cards to find out who's going to win all those green stamps. Serious stuff. For more reckless activity, more, just casual, that goes to the den. When we were having slumber parties, where were we? We were in the basement. We were off away so that we weren't so that the adults couldn't hear us make noise. They probably should be listening to us because we were doing crap we shouldn't have been doing. But that's a whole other video. These basements, these game rooms, these bonus rooms, this was always like where the less than nice furniture went. Almost always there was wood paneling in these areas. It was a very kind of brown, and particularly like in the 70s, it was very brown, a lot of plaid. It was, and I just remember like all these areas smelling like mold. Or maybe it was an unfinished basement. I want to hear from you. Please tell me about your stories about growing up in the game room, the den, the bonus room, the rompus room, the basement, the unfinished basement. Please hit me up in the comments. I look forward to talking with you, and we'll talk soon.